Welcome everyone to this week's Entrepreneurship 101 lecture on recruiting. Tonight, as we talk about recruiting, there's a couple things that I wanted to mention. One is that you might have been here for the market research lecture that Usha did. She leads the market intelligence team here at Mars, and they're often, every couple months, they put out a report. And the report that they just put out this week is called Talent for Tech, Recruiting the Right People for Your Tech Startup. So on your way in or on the way out, you might have seen this postcard. I think this is totally relevant and fits right in with what we're talking about tonight. What they did was interview startup founders around Ontario and ask what their challenges are in recruiting. There's a lot of challenges that Mars startups, as well as startups around the province, face, and they talk about those as well as sort of compare what the situation is here versus what's happening in the Valley. For example, engineers in the Valley are demanding extremely high salaries. There's a large employee turnover, and people are jumping from startup to startup as many as 2 to 3 a year. So you can see the recruitment situation down there is fairly competitive. Some say maybe it's a surplus of founders, so they have too many options. For example, computer science students graduate in the Valley with a minimum of 3 jobs offered to them upon graduation. So that's it's a pretty challenging recruiting environment, but I think there's some challenges up here as well. We hear all the time people looking for developers and can't find developers. So I encourage you to download or view online the Talent for Tech report. I think it'll provide some insight and go into other areas that Margo might not have a chance to speak about today in our hour. Who here has watched Moneyball, the movie Moneyball? So I watched it on the weekend, and kind of knowing about all this recruitment stuff, I was like, wow, there's so many lessons in there. And then I just came across a really great article that was 17 quotes from Moneyball that startups can learn from. And if you're on our LinkedIn group, I posted it there because it's really fantastic. One of my favorite quotes from Moneyball is, your goal shouldn't be to buy players, your goal should be to buy wins. And I think that's something that there's a lot of focus on A players. You got to get the A players. But it's not just about hiring the VP engineering. It's about hiring the right person that's going to write code and deliver and launch a product. And a lot of people focus on bringing in an A player, but they're from a big company and they might not work in a startup environment or some of these challenges. So have a look on our LinkedIn group. I think that's a really neat movie for sort of navigating the challenges of recruiting the right players that work together as a team. So it is now, I would like to introduce Margo Crawford, our speaker tonight. Margo joined our Entrepreneurship 101 program last year. She also did a number of lectures in our best practice series. So if you'd like to learn more, she's in a couple lectures on the video page under the best practices series. They go into compensation and how to recruit salespeople. She's recognized as a human resources leader and is a recipient of the prestigious Vision Awards Human Resources Professional of the Year. She co-founded one of Ottawa's most successful startup companies called Meriton Networks and was instrumental in raising over $75 million in equity financing over 8 years. So she is actually an entrepreneur herself. She's now working as president and CEO of Business Sherpa Group. She also spent years in the public and nonprofit sectors where she led management negotiations with several union groups and sat on boards for nonprofit organizations and sports groups. As a respected business thought leader, she's a frequent speaker at key industry events, and since she lives in Ottawa, we're always really delighted that she takes the time out of her schedule to come to Toronto to speak with us. So welcome, Margo.
Thanks very much, Kara. So that's very odd to see yourself up on a big screen, and I'm glad I didn't wear the same suit. So, and I also saw some themes there that are going to be repeated tonight, not in the exact same context. Some of it's going to be updates and, sort of bringing things into the context of 2012. So we'll just move forward. So as Carrie mentioned, I do have a human resources background, spans over 25 years. The last 12 years have been involved in startups, my own startup that I was a co-founder with, so lived the experience. It sold 8 years later, and at that point in time I decided to form Business Sherpa Group, which essentially is a full-service HR team of HR executives, lead business partners, right through to new grad students. So a team that's almost exclusively servicing small enterprises. There's a few different ones than that, but generally looking at small businesses and helping them support the full spectrum of HR services. So now I've been supporting up to 20 companies, both in Toronto and in Ottawa. So that's sort of the background and the backdrop that I bring to my observations today. Okay, there we go. So some of the themes I just want to touch on, it's not necessarily going to go in this order, but I'm going to continue to touch on this in the presentation, is talking about HR and startups today, some of the best practices, as well as planning your organization, and that's going to be a big sort of backdrop in the whole presentation. Recruitment versus strategic talent sourcing, so a lot of what Carrie was alluding to in terms of some of the pressures and what we have to do to bring in the right mix. And then just kind of looking at 2012 and effective recruitment in 2012. Okay. So let's start with some of the realities of 2012. So we all know that cash is king. That's not new. It just continues to be a pressure. We know that teams will only grow as large as they absolutely must. Each new hire has to equal the best decision for the next dime spent. Many times I've asked the CEO, is this the absolute best decision for the next dime you have to spend? Could it be another resource or another decision? So it's not just about hiring. Marketing efforts, as we know, are focused strictly on reaching your customers, reaching your partners, reaching your investors. It is not around creating a local presence or local buzz. And also, we know that many companies have to last longer than they might have anticipated. I don't know a single company I support that doesn't have a scenario A and a scenario B, and sometimes a scenario C. So we know that there's lots of possible variations your organization can take. So all of these are very significant hurdles for a company trying to be very successful, and in particular, HR and recruitment. So some additional pressures. Carrie alluded to a few of them. So first of all, finding people has never been easier. Finding talent has never been harder. And there's many reasons for this. So social media was interesting, listening to myself talking about LinkedIn. Back in 2009, even in 2008, I was using LinkedIn. I could easily come into a room and people would be writing that down. What is that? And even in 2009, it was just starting to get some mainstream thought. I can say it's fully embraced now, and to the point of it's actually being exploited to a certain extent. So you have a couple of different realities. The bottom line is it does create a lot more noise that you have to navigate. The supply and demand. So I have a company that is based in Ottawa, and it also has a site in the valley, so they're based in Mountain View. And I have lived the last 3 years the reality of Silicon Valley, and everything that you've heard is absolutely true. It is a lingering bubble that's just staying there despite all economic demise around the world. There's this pocket in Silicon Valley that is just crazy. Nutty salaries, people asking for signing bonuses, not knowing if you've really had someone until they actually enter your premises, and then yes, indeed, taking off. So the loyalty factor is way low, the expectation factor is very high, and of course, I have tremendous difficulty finding talent there. So what we're starting to see, and there's certainly been winds of this in Ottawa, and I'm sure it's going to be in Toronto, are some of these companies looking for the talent and starting to migrate this way. So that's only going to create more pressure. I really can see this coming down the track. So, and of course, the last thing is our time and our bandwidth has not, those pressures haven't lessened. We continue to have those ongoing pressures. So what does that mean? That means in startups, we have to really think, with all those pressures, we have to think about getting HR right, doing it properly. But I would argue it's more than that. I really fundamentally believe that small employers are the best employers. We know they offer the best experiences. We talk about that all the time as we bring people in. I also feel that those small employers, and I've seen it happening in several of them, can form themselves in such a way that they really are the top employers. They are worrying about employee engagement. They are trying to be responsible. They are trying to be fair. They're doing it with a mind of a sustainable business. So they really can be best employers. And I feel that comes through very effective planning, discipline. It does take time, it does take discipline, and putting best practices into place. They will save dollars, and they will absolutely build your best team and the best culture. And I can tell you I work with completely opposite ends of that spectrum. I have a company, both in revenue. I have one company, both under 20, that, the culture as a CEO likes to be liked, likes to be friends with everyone, and is told he's respected by his staff and feels that way, but secretly he's very frustrated with the productivity of people, and then they seem to be taking off early and not really putting a lot of effort in. And I was brought in to bring in policies to, get better behavior out of the staff. So, clearly that's not a culture that is going to have engagement. On the other spectrum, I have a very solid HR practices entering into a new stage company. They just want to have it in place, they want to get it right, and guess what? They do performance management. I have an employee who's on a performance improvement plan in a small company of under 20. And it's all about, no, you need to know the expectations. It matters because of this for the company. And guess what? Most people want to rise up to that. So best practices will save a lot. And then the last thing I want to really talk on is about strategic talent sourcing versus recruitment. And there is a difference. So let's talk about planning. So first of all, we know how it all starts out. We have a product, we have a solution, we have a service. It's very clear. We set up and we create our marketing plans. We go to great lengths to understand the customer, the competitive environment, the partners, the influencers, how we want to position, and we continue to cycle on that. We continue to refine it and fine-tune that plan. We also know about our technology. We think about the roadmap, we think about the milestones, the features that we have to hit, what it's going to look like and what it's going to do, and again, refine it. And of course, financial, we create business plans, we understand what our cost structures are, we know what resources we need, we get the investments required that we need, we budget well and plan. And we do have HR plans, they're in there, and this is what they look like. Almost every company I go into, their HR plan is a headcount profile. So they've got all their plans, they've got their 3 to 5 year plan, and then there's this growing number of headcount, and that is the human resources plan. And I'm living with it. I know this is true. So what I want to say is that organizations actually have a life cycle, and you have to consider this in proper planning. So when you think about it, every company has fundamental pieces of what they need to get done. There's the strategic, where you're defining what you're doing. There's the operational, where you're planning what you're doing. And then, of course, there's the tactical, where you're doing. Okay? So we start at the beginning at formation. It's all about getting your proof points. You want to get resources together. You're going to achieve those milestones. You're going to get early customer engagements. Your founders and staff are always taking on multiple roles. They're usually building up a lot of technical resources to start, and often at a senior level. The selling is absolutely performed by the CEO, the CTO, those senior leaders. And the board is often very focused on giving direction, advice. They're trying to support the team to achieve those early milestones. So that's very typical in that formation stage. Then we move into that pre-revenue. So, you've started to get the product is ready now. You're starting to get some customer wins, may not be revenue, but it's wins. And you're getting a lot more clarity around your forecasting and your results, and the internal operations are starting to form. And at the same time, the expectations around customer engagement is increasing. Your technical team's probably being pulled into customer activities a little bit more. The deadlines are getting tighter to produce certain milestones. You might have additional financing requirements. Also, your board is expecting more. They've moved from just strictly advising and trying to nurture along to expecting some performance and results, largely around reporting and performance. And you need more business operational needs, and transactional things are happening inside the doors of the company. Then finally, you get to the stage where you are in revenue, and of course, all the expectations in all the areas increase and intensify. You've got absolute internal smooth operations that need to take place. You have strong performance and reporting requirements, and you have an established customer base that you have to support. So there's a lot of pressure. So what? We know that. We've got all those heads on our roadmap that we're going to add. So it's all okay. Well, here's the impact. So we start out with our people. Of course, we know all of us that in the early days, we've got individuals who are stretching up and down all the levels of the organization. They've got the bandwidth and they're doing multiple roles and doing a lot of work. As time carries on, of course, their bandwidth decreases and they have less time for some of the other activities they might have been doing. And, they might, sorry, did someone say something? Oh, okay. So you might have, less and less time for certain activities. And then, of course, once you get to a lot of intensification, you're not just talking about time pressures and capacity pressures, you're also starting to talk about capability pressures. And more importantly, what you end up seeing are some very significant critical gaps, and they do show themselves. And I have many companies at different phases where that shows itself, and also in mature companies as they change. So there is an impact on the people. Of course, the people are feeling a lot of pressure at this point. So that's not a great environment. So what's the impact on the company? So these are just a list of a whole bunch of features that I've seen, I'm living with, and I'm sure everyone in this room who's in a company will probably nod their head at least one of these, all right? So your leaders are being drawn down into operational things. They are not out in front of the customers enough. The leaders have a huge number of direct reports. I have seen organizational charts where the whole team reports to one person. And as scaling pressures increase, the response usually is to just start adding bodies. It's a bit of a panic reaction. Let's get more people in to do these things, at the tactical level often. So as a result, of course, you start seeing a lot of bottlenecks. A lot of decisions start flowing through one person, and you start losing the efficiencies you're hoping to gain by adding more people. The other thing I see are titles. Titles that are offered out at early stages start blocking room to bring in the more senior leader you might actually need. So this becomes confusing. Also, mixes of titles. You've got titles all over the map and different types, whatever you happen to offer at that point in time that you brought someone in and you felt that you needed. So there's confusion over reporting, responsibilities, career path. And of course, the board's expectations are going to the feeling that they're not being met fully, the performance and reporting requirements, because there's pressure. You start realizing some challenges in hiring sales. I always feel like I'm picking on salespeople. I'm not. It's a very tough hire. It's the one role where one of the responses, we've got to bring someone in sales early. And I would say, in my own view, is that in sales, when you think about it, if you're a CEO or a founder or whatever, the last relationship you want to give up control of is the relationship with your customer. I would say that you probably want to try to offload more operational stuff and get yourself out more. But often the response is bringing the salesperson in. And I guarantee your very first salesperson you bring into your company is going to want the VP of sales title. Regardless of their abilities, regardless of what you need, that's what they're going to go for. And you might box yourself in. The last point is the lack of separation of roles, leading to weaker strategic decisions. And what I mean by this is that fundamentally, you do need someone thinking about what you could be, what you should be, what it needs to look like, future looking out in with the customer base, getting that feel. You fundamentally need someone delivering on the day-to-day, making it happen. And then you also fundamentally have someone who wants to sell what can be sellable now. And usually in startups, a lot of people are doing all of those roles. The challenge is that all of those perspectives equally have a lot of merit. And by having one type of perspective over-bias the direction the company is taking, can take you down the wrong path. You can take too much of a technology future and not a customer-centric view. So these are some of the challenges that I do see in companies. And of course, it leads to a lot of frustration, confusion, you feel stuck, and just weak. So what's the answer? I say plan the organization, not the headcount. That idea of just sticking a whole bunch of numbers on a budget sheet, here's how my headcount's going to grow and that's my HR plan, is really not on. It's not going to take you where you need to go. Consider the potential future critical gaps. Feature them into your plan. You know that you will see them. So don't ignore them. It doesn't mean you have to fill them first or right away, or even at all. You just need that function taken care of. Also, bring people in as you bring people in at different stages, they may or may not fill a gap. Recognize that. They may create another gap. So constantly be looking at that. Be very analytical about what you're filling in terms of an organization. Also, consider that reporting and handoff and project management is going to be a very critical function. It's an area that I see often overlooked. It's not overlooked. People say, yeah, I'm doing it. But that handoff between external commitments you're making with customers to the internal delivery is a spot where a lot of companies stumble. They just can't make that transfer of what you've got to do and commit to getting it done and making sure that information flows well. It's a pretty critical area in my opinion. Also, you are absolutely going to have individuals performing multiple roles. We know this. We're all doing it. So you have to plan for, at some point in time, some separation of those roles. Not necessarily all of them, but you have to appreciate as time marches on, you are going to need different individuals. You have to look at it that way. All right? And also, my point I just made is that you always fundamentally will have a need to be looking forward, doing, and selling. And they sometimes can be conflicting priorities. So if you're starting to see that and feeling there's a lot of debate around the table around those conflicting priorities, you might want to look at how you're set up. All right? So I want to just talk then just briefly about the features of strong organizational planning. There's no textbook saying this is the way you have to do it, and even what I present is not going to be the way you have to do it. It'll be unique to your organization. I'm trying to present just some fundamentals to think about and just to keep in your mind as you plan. So if we think about it, going back to the defining and planning, your key functions are those elements, and those are largely external facing roles. Not always, but largely those are external facing roles. And generally you have internal facing roles are the doers. All right? And then we think about what happens in the company. So there's those who run the business. I've just plunked titles in here. They're not meaningful. I just wanted to give descriptors of what I meant. So you might have your CEO or your CFO, who are doing the things like the board stuff, the financing, and so on, getting investments and whatnot. And then internally, you might have more operational people, maybe a controller, an accountant, an office manager, HR, or whatever. And by the way, I'm not saying that this is what you do out of the gate. I'm saying ultimately, these are all the things that need to get attention in some way, in some manner. All right? Then we look at, there we are, defining what you're doing. And there's two sides to this, of course. There's a market-centric side and there's a technology side. And I'm not saying it can't be the same role. In fact, you'll see similar positions across these. The fact is that you do have external-facing roles who are influencing the market, who are reaching the channels, who are understanding the customer segments. There's certainly an external role looking out from a technology view. What is the future? What are the trends? What are the needs? And then internally, delivering on those pieces. All right? Internally, you have people supporting those pieces. So maybe researchers, whatnot, helping to feed that information. The next stage, of course, is then once you define you're going to design, you're going to build it, you're going to create it. So again, you're going to have a head who's going to lead that effort, and then you're going to have operational people, your engineers, your scientists, your QA, whatever, actually building what you have said you're going to do. The next stage is the building and testing, and I separate this out from design because fundamentally you have to get it ready to go out to market. So that's building it, whether you're manufacturing or not, or you might be doing some formulations or whatnot, and you have to do testing and so on. So there's individuals taking care of that piece. And then you have to also reach and sell. Reach and sell fundamentally is your marketing, you're reaching the targets, and then you're also selling to them. So you're making sure you've got good channels in place, you've got good marketing programs, you've positioned well, you've got business development going on, you've got the proper sales and partnerships happening, and then you have all the internal supporting functions supporting that activity. And then finally, you deliver and you support it. Whether you're doing this yourselves or your contract, you still are offering that service, and that expectation is there. So when you look across this matrix, really when we think about it in startups, really everybody is pretty much reaching up and down that spectrum as well as across. And that's how you start out, and that's how you should start out. The point of this is that over time, you absolutely are going to hit points where you're going to need to recognize that more focus has to be on that outward-facing role, and we want to make sure we've got good capability inside. So again, it's just trying to put the map out there of all the pieces you've got to take care of. And it can be some of them can be taken care of by one person. You know, and that might make perfect sense for your organization. But it also depends. How do you sell, et cetera. But knowing that there's another type of view that you need to have and another sort of plan other than a bunch of numbers across a spreadsheet is going to help you plan properly. So now you have that sort of view. When you think about it, and this is something I've talked about earlier, about integrating that organizational plan into the rest of your business plan. We know we've got all of our technical milestones of what we have to achieve when. We have our financial milestones. We know when we have to make money or get more money. We also know what our customer milestones are, when product has to be ready, when features have to be ready, and so on. And then finally, you take those organizational map, and these are just, again, put in here for just example. The point being is that as you hit some of those things, those functions become more and more apart, and you should be building this into your plan. And the hatch marks there, of course, the timeline could be anywhere from 5 years to 1 year, depending on your organization. All right? So let's move on. So it really is all about executing a plan and having a plan. And I'm really arguing for putting a bit of time into making that plan more useful for your company. So but also in thinking about how your organization needs to look, this is an absolute foundation for a whole raft of best practices on the HR side. As you know what your organization is going to look like, you can create job levels. You can actually create compensation plans. You can look at what that needs to look like versus, you know, what happens to come to you, you know, as you build. You also have you have a better ability to create a much clearer and more compelling job description when you reach out to people. And then there's some other foundational HR practices that I think are really critical for optimizing an organization. So look at your employment terms. Set them out properly. Make sure you've got practices and you've got policies that are fair and reflect your culture versus what you organically adopt in time. Look to a total reward strategy. This is very, very contemporary. The idea of looking beyond just salary. We also have options, but there's other things that you can do as a startup. And you want to be looking at that whole thing. Part of it's career growth. What are you offering? I have a startup where I've really suggested there's some people that opportunity that they would not get in any other company is some time to be in front of the customer or to present or to get some time in front of a board or to get pulled off something and do a little bit of architecture. So there's a lot of things you can do. So performance management, look at your employment agreements. Make sure they are in place and they are going to protect you. They're fair and they're up to current standards. You know, obviously you want to protect your IP and your confidential information, and you do want to take care of professional development. The idea is you want to have your employees engaged, and small companies are the most poised to be able to get engagement. People are there, they're excited about being part of a small company. You should be leveraging that. There's great opportunity to be the best employers. And so there's many ways of achieving these practices. Okay. So now I'd like to move into a little bit of the recruitment space and talk a little bit about strategic sourcing versus recruitment. They are different. In my mind, recruitment is you have an opportunity and you need to fill it. So I'm ready for you now, okay? And so hopefully you've got some really good people ready to come on board. So when you think about how people behave, you know, when you think about what is the factors that really define career satisfaction, and these aren't in any particular order, they're different, frankly, for every person. The idea is that fundamentally, this is probably the map, you know, that they're happy in their job, that they like the people, that they're getting paid well or they're getting compensated well, their career is growing, they're in exciting work, they're learning new stuff. And sometimes it's other needs. It's altruistic. I really like I want to be in clean tech. I just really believe in that. So there can be a whole bunch of factors in play. The point of this slide is just to demonstrate that it takes an awful lot to come off the table before someone really truly becomes even a near active candidate. Okay? An active candidate is someone who's putting their resume out there, they're on the job boards, they're ready to make a move. They're way over on the other spectrum. Even the near active candidates, it takes a lot to get to that point where you're really even going to think about that. Okay? So What happens is, of course, all the conventional sourcing really targets just the strategies for the near active and the active. And the problem, of course, is that this is also a very competitive market in terms of sourcing talent. There's all kinds of other people after those same people, so it's very difficult. So when you look at it, you've got all of this sourcing activity drawing people into your funnel who are just in this area, the near active candidate and the active candidate. And even the most forward-thinking recruitment strategies where you're outreaching and so on, you're really probably still only touching those near active candidates. So the problem, of course, is that it's ignoring a huge addressable market, and also it's not a targeted approach. It's not hitting that perfect candidate for you, and you are the perfect job for them. So when we're talking about strategic sourcing, I'm talking about a full spectrum. I'm saying, yes, absolutely we want effective recruitment campaigns, because those perfect candidates could be anywhere on that spectrum. But also, there is the concept of nurturing relationships. If you know that perfect person's out there, you want to engage with them. You might not be ready. They might not be ready. You do want them to know about you. So I do want to talk about these elements. So when you think about understanding that perfect candidate, we can absolutely borrow from the principles of very good customer relationship and understanding your customer, that marketing intelligence that you already have in place. And it's very same principles. Starts out with segmentation. So research the profile of the perfect candidate for each role. You know who they are. You know what type of schools they've gone to. You know what networks they belong to. You know how they keep informed. It's a bit of brainstorming around that perfect. If we had waved our magic wand, that perfect person looks like this, and this is where they go to for these different things. What are the attributes and behaviors and career patterns that are indicators of a high potential candidate? Are they early in their career, or do you want them to have gone through a few companies? Do you want someone who has been in a leadership role and seems to continue to gravitate to that leadership role? What are the attributes you're looking for that perfect candidate? And also, what are their relevant career satisfaction factors? It could be that that type of person that we want, they only really want the most leading edge technology. They're a tinkerer, they do stuff, they've got hobbies at home, and they're always got their head going on the next new idea. That's what they're like. And you start understanding what speaks to that person and where they are. So you start understanding the messages and the channels. So of course, in messaging, we want to form the messages that speak to that candidate. And of course, the goal here is that you are implanting the idea of your company far before someone's thinking about it. You're letting them know who you are and that they are the perfect candidate for you. And you want to try to get those passive candidates into active candidates eventually. And of course, this messaging is heard through all of your media, whether it's you're doing your website or whether it's whatever you do to reach out and be out in the market. It could be your marketing program, speaking notes for people who are out at events, whatever. Online activities, promotions. But they should be channels that reach those targets for you. Okay? And then the channels, again, this information and research you get, it's going to define the channels that are most appropriate to reach that market. And this is more and more important as you get into a much more competitive landscape. So you develop these plans, it's going to find your talent. All right, it's going to nurture relationships, it's going to convert your passive candidates into active candidates, and it's also going to help you to close, because you will have done so much groundwork getting that match. It's going to make it a much easier ability to close on a candidate. So when we think about it, this is going to, what is the benefits of this? It's going to give you clarity on what that successful candidate looks like for your organization. This keeps you focused, as opposed to vacillating as different types of candidates come to you with different skill sets. You know what you need. You can create a very compelling job description that speaks to the candidate. I can tell you, I've worked in a lot of places where I will go to great lengths to create a very, very customized description around a role. And that description, I get the feedback that for the people that I bring into that are high potential, they really, really liked what the description said. It really matched them. And it can be things about putting on your description the values of your company, what you care about, what you're about, what the culture is, all of those things. That's going to speak to the type of person you want, as opposed to doing just the bland description that just goes out there. And of course, it allows you to roll out a very effective targeted recruitment campaign. You know what you want, you know where they are, you know how they behave, you can target, as opposed to shotgun approaches, which, as we know, are very noisy and very expensive. Okay? So once we actually get into that recruitment, really what we want to think about is being very tight on the execution around that. So knowing what you are looking for, when you're looking for it, and really do think about a very highly targeted approach. The shotgun blast really doesn't work. It creates a lot of noise for you. And realize that the process takes time. In the ideal world, with all of the planets aligning, you really are not going to have someone in seat, and I talk about in seat, not hired, at best 6 weeks. For most roles, it's probably 2 months, and for more difficult roles, it can be more. So don't think I need someone in 3 weeks and start your recruitment. You're not going to have it. Okay? And just think before you act. I think just a little bit of thought is going to put a lot of definition around what you want and keep you clear and reach the person you want to reach. So sourcing. We know that there's a lot of noise. I've shown this slide before. Frankly, the world hasn't changed much. We have high-cost processes, which of course are recruitment firms and the executive search firms, and low-cost processes, which are referrals. You have low credibility sourcing and high credibility sourcing. So this spectrum is kind of a landscape, and you obviously know where you probably don't want to put money towards. There are times, absolutely, to use executive search and recruitment firms. I would argue executive search has got a little bit higher credibility sourcing because they are not a volume game. There's a lot more high-touch process involved in that, but it's also very expensive. And then there's all the other types of programs. And you'll notice at the bottom I have employee word of mouth versus trusted individual endorsement. And what I mean there is, you know, someone can absolutely recommend someone. Do you trust that recommendation? Fundamentally, I believe the recommendation that comes from someone that you trust, that has nothing else to gain, and all they have to lose is their reputation, is probably going to be your best source, your most trusted source. So, of course, I've shown this as well before, that having an actual plan in place. Like, just start out with a planning meeting, think through where do you want to post, map it out. See that it's going to take 2 to 3 weeks to get some good flow of candidates in, and then you're going to interview and so on. So it does take time. But just sitting down and thinking about the different places, just even that moment of planning, will give you so much more effective targeted recruitment. So speaking of that, and I was interested to see that the social networking reference in my piece there. I'm certain everybody in this room is on LinkedIn. I'd be surprised if you were not. And of course, I am still a very strong advocate. It is a great sourcing tool. But I kind of want to go through some of the pros and cons and some tips around using LinkedIn as a sourcing strategy, because it is a good sourcing strategy. So of course, it's got huge reach in all regions. But of course, the volume is overwhelming. So filter. There's a lot of filters built into LinkedIn that you can use. So filter by geography, you can filter on. So you'll see those over on the left-hand side. Use them. It will help. All right? You can reach specific individuals, who seem like a good fit. That's the pro. The con is you'll be contacted by a lot of individuals who think they are a good fit. And you've got to sort through all of that. And of course, I really believe, again, that you want to use those in-mail credits, you want to reach out, call, you can do that, and follow up with people. Obviously, you can post jobs. Any posting you put up, I guarantee you will automatically get a flood of responses from around the world. There's a lot of people who have got programs written in so that their resume automatically forwards on for certain postings. This comes back to the compelling job description. I think if you are really, really thinking about speaking to a candidate, it's going to help you filter. It's also going to help someone self-filter for themselves. They'll start recognizing this is an opportunity for me, and they'll put effort into reaching you as well. And you can target communities within LinkedIn, of course. We know there's lots of user groups, and you can use other social media, so that's great. It allows that targeting activity. The con of that there are some user communities that really shun recruitment activity. They don't want recruiters on there, and they don't want it to be a job board. There are user groups, though, that have job boards, so use them. I would also say it's really important, don't just turn it over to one person doing that activity. there's other people who are involved in those groups who might actually be part of that forum. And it's easy enough for them just to put a message up. They don't have to put a job posting. Oh, by the way, we're hiring. Check out our website. And it just reaches that targeted group. So you can use that channel. And of course, you can see recommendations on individuals. On the other hand, some people have become very expert at getting referrals from everyone. And it just adds to the noise. So all I would say is filter the recommendations, look at them closely, and always still do your own reference checks. I would say never give up on that particular practice. It's very important. And there's lots of interesting statistics to look at about companies and about individuals. Again, you have to read into these and have a bit of a skeptical eye when you're looking at them. Don't trust everything you read. Have you ever heard of that? You have to understand what is self-promotion versus legitimate signs of excellence, and really try to understand the difference. So, with a bit of a note of skepticism, I have a couple of samples I wanted to just show you on this because I thought this was fun. So, I felt this was not violating any privacy rules because it's a public forum. So this is Apple's job board. This is the Apple LinkedIn site. It's their corporate profile. And when you go on there, there's all these statistics on the right that you can get about LinkedIn, about Apple. So you see over there, the most recommended at Apple. We've got Corey Lewis from the App Store. We have a recruiter there and a senior project. They're the most recommended at Apple. Why? Because they are the most recommended at Apple. They have 90 recommendations, another has 69 recommendations, and one didn't put the number in. So it's not that everyone loves their work. It's just that they've gone out and made sure they've filled up all of their recommendations, and it's just rolling it out. So you want to, as I said, just having a bit of a skeptical, eye, and just, read fully into the information you're receiving there. And then here's another site. This is Microsoft's. This is their corporate site. And so if you see down on the right-hand side here, this is where all of that corporate statistics are. So you can get information, learn about interesting information about people who work at Microsoft and so on. So there's a lot there, but this is actually a really good tool and an area that a lot of companies haven't taken care of. They certainly have done their own personal LinkedIn profiles, but think about your corporate LinkedIn profile. What do you want to say there? And look they have spots where you can connect with their recruiters. You have jobs that you might be interested in. So more and more, you want to take some time and build that up. That's a really good source. And again, if you're not paying attention to it, it's going to get cluttered with some noise. All right. So just some quick best practices on social networking tools. Do post your opportunities on your corporate LinkedIn and on your personal LinkedIn. Push it out to your target communities for sure. And search. Still do search on LinkedIn. There's great ways you can reach really, really high quality candidates that really match your profile. Trust your own networks with a critical eye. Even in my own networks, there's people I know who have nothing but good to say about anyone, and I can't really trust that recommendation. I really want to know the real goods. Consider AdWords. If you're trying to create presence and you know where your channels are, who you're reaching, and what they read, and how they get informed, you can create some presence through AdWords on those sites. Post messages. Just send messages on forums or tweet them. I tweet them all the time. And give attention to your company's corporate profile. Don't neglect that piece. So just as a wrap up, I really want to make the case now, going back, because I didn't address it, of this concept of candidate relationship management. So guess what? CRM, of course, same thing as customer relationship management. We have increasing pressures. We know this. The competitive pressures are going to increase, I guarantee it. The sourcing tools are creating a lot more noise. Recruitment firms are still your most expensive option. It costs a lot of money that you don't have. And small teams mean you have to do more accurate recruiting. So you really do need to find those perfect candidates. And it's not hard. I'm not talking about sophisticated programs or software or anything. I mean, my goodness, it can be Excel. It's just about having a spot where once you identify some really good people, you put them in a spot. You have them there and you attend to them. You nurture the relationship. Okay? And it's part of your sourcing strategy. It's very simple. And then you can also, of course, use all this knowledge that you do gain by understanding that person to create a very good compelling job description to screen your candidates, and you just carry on it. They feed into each other. So again, as I said, it's a similar concepts to your customer relationship management principles. Once you have those people identified, you want to let them know about you. You can reach out to them. There's, list server messages. There's special, even if it's once a quarter, that you're saying, okay, I'm going to do something for my high potentials. I'm going to do some activity around that. And you're just drawing them into you. And it's a very safe environment. No, we don't have anything for you now. We just, just want to keep in touch with you. And I think it's a concept that really allows people to stand out as well in all the noise, to know that you've taken the time to know about them. So when they are actually thinking, certainly you'll be at front of mind, which is a good place to be in that very competitive landscape. And please don't overcomplicate it. It can be very, very simple. It's just attending to some of those passive candidates. So, my final statement, planning the organization, knowing what you want and need will ultimately be the recipe for driving your talent management success. And I absolutely believe that that is what is going to create performance for your company and success for what you dreamed of doing. So that's what I have. Hopefully that's given you some food for thought, if nothing else. And I'm, of course, open for questions, comments, observations, contrarian views, whichever you like. Thank you.
Thanks, Margo. Yeah, things have really changed. LinkedIn is a really robust tool nowadays for hiring.
Yeah, absolutely.
For people like you're experienced in interviewing and sort of filtering candidates, for entrepreneurs who may not have gone through the hiring process many times before, what do you think are some of the key things that people do wrong when they're first learning how to hire?
When they're interviewing, sorry?
Interviewing, like finding and selecting candidates.
Yeah. I find the thing that people do most wrong is just have a conversation with the candidate. They come in, they don't really prepare for the interview. They might have a couple of elements that they want to touch on, but I find that they leave and they haven't really found out a whole lot more than what the resume has told them. And, they've allowed that conversation to take place. And this is where I go back to knowing what your profile is of your ideal candidate, really understanding what that ideal person looks like and what is it that you really want to find out about them, and finding questions that answer those, or developing questions that actually answer those questions, like that things that you're wondering, and making sure that you've got alignment. So just a little bit of preparation and thinking about questions that are not just going to be uninformative.
How do you sort through people who are just really good talkers from those that are doers?
I come back again to your planning, because a really good talker, again, poor sales. I'm sorry for anyone who's in sales here, but they're very good. They're very good. They know how to sell, and they can absolutely tell you they, can do anything, and often they can. But if you get back to the fundamentals of what you need and making sure in advance you're mapping out, I need to find out about this, and if you need to, even develop the question around it. And even if it gets off script, you're going back to those questions. So at the end of the day, you still realize you've got those questions answered.
And one question from webcast before we go to the floor. What's the difference between hiring employees and recruiting volunteers? Are there significant differences when you're finding and selecting volunteers from regular employees?
I guess it depends. If you're talking about volunteers being people to come into your company who will work for free for a while, I don't really call those volunteers myself. So in that instance, I say no. Even if they're coming to work for free because they're wanting to get the experience or whatever, I say it's the exact same process. They're part of your team. Volunteers, presumably you've got a project in place. I still would use some of the elements. You want to know what you need them for. Because again, every person coming in, there's a distraction factor there. So I still think there's elements that are the same, but I do see a little bit of a difference there.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to do one more question just because it follows on that question, also from a webcast viewer. So if you're in a startup mode with no funding and you need to hire an app or a web developer, how do you compensate them? Should you offer them a stake in the company or pay them? This is a question that comes up a lot for how to compensate when in the very beginning.
So, as I said at the outset, cash is king. I understand that. I'm not a fan of not paying for a couple of reasons. First of all, at what stage do you move it over to paying? You have to be building a real business. And if it can't sustain itself, and if you can't pay people, and you carry on that way, do you really have a real business? You know, you can fool yourself into thinking you've got something when you don't. So that's one element. The other element is that I find that people can compromise an awful lot when someone's willing to work for free. Yeah. And that's a concern because they're still going to be part of your team. And certainly it's very hard when you get to the point of paying and say, okay, well, this guy who's come and worked for free, they're not really a fit, but they did the work, but now I can pay them. And you're really going to go and say, well, we don't actually want you? You've really, really handcuffed yourself.
One thing I've learned making the Entrepreneurs Toolkit content, we had a lot of volunteers that were like, yeah, I just want to help entrepreneurs and share my knowledge. But if we didn't pay people, they just didn't deliver on time a lot.
Yeah,
we didn't have any control over when things would be done or the quality, so it was just easier, honestly, to pay them.
I agree, totally. Over here?
So let's say you have a startup and like you're going around looking for developers. And you mentioned there's a lot of noise in a lot of sources that startups generally use to recruit people. What is one of the most effective tools or strategies that you've seen a lot of other startups do when they're looking for specific developer talent to filter out the noise and figure out who are the real good people out there?
So the most effective thing that I've done, certainly, and I've seen, I do use LinkedIn. Obviously, you know, your own personal network is always a useful tool. But I do an awful lot of, before we even post anything and start creating that noise, I do some searching. You know, you've got some parameters you're looking for. It's very easy to do some searching. You can see if someone's interested, and I've recruited a lot of people that way. You see the profiles, you reach out to them. So I find that very effective, to be honest with you. Ultimately, once you post it, you will get volume, and you might feel good about getting volume, but you will get noise, and it's not to say you won't find good candidates that way. But generally, a couple of startups, we try to do a bit of searching first and see if we can find some people. Okay.
If one question from a webcaster, we got quite a number coming in. If you hire someone and they leave an existing job to take your offer and then they don't work out, how do you deal with that? So I guess, what are the fundamentals of firing somebody or not renewing a contract?
Well, I mean, I think that, people do struggle with that, particularly in a startup, because you're in a high-risk environment and you feel bad about someone leaving a job and you've got a high-risk environment. And part of the risk is fit, because it's a very tight fit. It's not like there's a lot of other opportunities that they can move over into. And I feel very fundamentally that it's all around having your best practices in place, have a very good employment contract, be very clear about what you expect, and ultimately, these are grown-ups and they have to make a decision. So just make sure your fundamentals are in place. A very good, solid employment contract that talks about what the terms are if things don't work out. Over here.
Hi, my question is on hiring salesmen on a commission-only basis. Are they considered to be employees of the company, or are they self-employed, and do they have the same rights and responsibilities as regular salaried employees? Thanks.
They can be either. I certainly have had salespeople who are on straight commission. Not very much. Usually if they're employed, they're coming on salary. The challenge there, of course, is that as an employee, you have some obligations to remit deductions, source deductions, and so on. So if you're bringing them on as an employee, and under the terms of employment, you have to remember, even as a commission, you have to remit taxes, you have to do source deductions, and so on. So it's a bit complicated. Oftentimes where I see someone who's just strictly on commission, that they're on an agent relationship of some sort, where they're just basically, and I think that that's probably the preferable way to go, if they're just strictly on commission. You know, they basically have results, you spell out what they are, and they get a certain commission. That being said, make sure you really know your cost structure.
But can you exercise any control over those employees that are on a commission?
Oh yeah, basis? You can, absolutely. It just is on how you spell out the terms, right? What region that they're going to be on, exclusivity, that's a real problem. I mean, certainly I've had sales people, especially when it's remote, so I've had some in Asia who were working for 2 employers, and that was even when they were an employee. So it's all in the terms of the agreement.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Oh.
He's trying to trip me. It's okay, we're friends. I just wanted to ask you a question in regards to the volunteer intern kind of thing. What about if you're a company and you're making money, you're able to hire employees that are with, but you're in a growth stage and you want to find really good talent to fit your culture. And one of those ways we're considering is to hire and try to kind of filter out people by having them work for free, or is it bringing them on as interns.
Okay.
And then kind of, let's say it's a month or 3-month internship, and then making a decision then. Do you feel that's kind of a good decision?
So you're not talking about intern coming from school, though?
It can be just anybody. It can be just any, like a volunteer, like you said, of any age. But it's more of we're thinking of a process to really find the perfect fit of an employee. How do you feel about that strategy?
So I still feel the same about free versus paying. I still think those same issues that I described before can play out, in terms of compromising what you're looking for. Fundamentally, if you're bringing in that talent, you should pay. So I still feel strongly about paying. You might pay less, okay? And you also might just pay you might have where I've seen it work is you have a very set term. It's going from this point to this point. It's clear they start out that way, so there's no obligations beyond this date, and that's where it ends. And really, that allows the relationship to come to a natural conclusion, and for you to assess, are they a fit or not a fit, and there's no expectations beyond that. But there are implications of not paying. There are also a few legal issues too, if you start talking about...
What are those legal issues?
Well, some of the things about what are the terms that, if they are they deemed an employee, are there any source deductions you should be paying? Are they able to collect EI and so on? And if so, you should be remitting some amounts for them. So there's some complications there. There's also a few complications with respect to WSIB and work and health and safety in the workplace. So if they were injured on site, are they covered under your insurance and those sorts of things? So, you'd have to get some specific advice, but those are the things I've navigated before. I still feel the better answer is to pay them less, to pay them something so that there's consideration for the work being done, define the term very clearly, and have it come to a natural conclusion and allow yourself to assess. And by the way, if you are getting students, and there's a lot of other sorts of programs, there's a lot of funding available for that. That's why I asked, like with NSERC and so on.
Okay. I just to add on to that, I just think a lot of entrepreneurs, we feel like when somebody's working for free, they're really hungry and they're going to really show themselves. I guess that's just a notion.
Yeah, and sometimes because you as a founder have done that.
Yeah,
right?
We've done that, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Where you're working for free. And I see some distinction there. You're taking all the risk. You're probably getting a big chunk of equity for that, and you've taken that. And it's your investment, really, into the company by working for free as a founder. But when you start actually bringing people onto your team, I'd really caution about saying, they're hungry or whatever, because they might be hungry, but they may not be good.
Thank you.
It's just for the audience, we have 3 HR workbooks. That the first one is called Building an A Team. It's about recruiting, and the other ones go into some simple HR policies and procedures to help you set up the initial things that you need to set up, and compensation as well, because it can get quite complicated. And also on the Entrepreneur's Toolkit, we have a section in the HR section that's tools and templates. So things like interview checklists, reference checklists, interview questions, sort of things to help you go, especially in the recruiting and finding, selecting, and recruiting, hiring candidates part of HR. There's lots of tools there to help. Yeah. And one last question.
Hello. In your practice, do startups work with people on a contract basis as opposed to payroll basis? And if they do, what are the pros and cons?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. On a
contract basis as
so
opposed
like as
to
a consultant?
payroll. Sorry?
As a consultant, not on your payroll?
Yeah.
I've seen both. So there's a couple of things that you want to think about there. Oftentimes, people who are coming as a consultant are looking for a premium rate on, so there is a cost factor. There's also a tax issue, right? I mean, not in terms of taxing the person, but if you're claiming R&D tax credits and so on, you can't claim that on a consultant. So that can actually be a big hit because that's often a big source of funding in early days of getting that type of, your shreds and so on. So that can really impact that piece. So I've certainly seen both. Also, you have to be cautious too from a Revenue Canada perspective of that. If they deem that to be an employer-employee relationship, if they're only working for you, that you can be audited and it can be deemed that, well, wait a minute, this is not a consulting relationship. They're on your site. They're only working for you. This is really employee, and you have been foregoing all these remittances and have penalty there. So you have to be cautious. I see it more for projects, to be honest with you. Okay. Anything else?
Well, I think
All right.
that's it for tonight.
Excellent.
Thank you
It was
very
a
much,
pleasure.
Margo. That was a great presentation.
All right, thank you.